Morning, everyone. I said I'll talk about trust at work, but before that, let me give you one more example from society. And like I said, I have been trying to justify rationally why trust is important, the actual, tangible, economic cost of trust or lack of trust, right? So when I was in India, and it's true even in today's times, if you went to a store and you asked for something, say I wanted to buy a lamp, you can't just walk into a store and pick up what you want and then pay for it. There is a shopkeeper at the front with everything blocked. You ask him what you want and he comes and hands it over to you. Because obviously lack of trust, nobody trusts the customers to go and pick up whatever they want without stealing anything. So it's very transactional. The other thing they did is, if you bought a lamp, the lamp was covered in a protective paper kind of a roll, but the end that goes into the socket was open, and they would put it in an electrical socket right next to them, show that it's actually working, and then they'll hand it over to you. Once you give the money and you get the lamp, the transaction is over. No returns, no repairs, nothing. And the reason they do that is two. One, obviously lack of trust. Nobody trusts customer to not bring back a different lamp, faulty lamp, and exchange it for a good one. And no one trusts the shopkeeper to not give a faulty lamp and be honest in the transaction. So trust is obviously one thing, but that also results in very thin margins. Indian stores operate on a very thin margin, so they cannot support returns or things like that. In US, it is estimated about 40% of the profits go to returns and logistics and things like that, because it's not just the loss of merchandise, but also the retailers have to work on the customer support and the reverse logistics and things like that, right? If Walmart did that, if you went to Walmart and if you bought an appliance and made sure that it was actually running, and that's in India, that happens for literally everything. You get a phone, you start it and make sure it's working. You get a blender, any kind of a machine, you always test, run, and make sure it works before you actually make the purchase. So imagine doing that in Walmart. If we did that, the commerce will simply stop. It will run at 1/10 of the speed that it happens today. The reason we are able to do that, the reason we are able to quickly purchase and get out of the store and then go somewhere else, and Walmart is able to quickly churn their inventory and make all profits, is because the trust that people have that in case something didn't work, they'll just come back and return it or replace it. And even if it didn't, they take a chance because they know they have a chance to return. Similarly, the stores have a good faith in their customers that they're not going to take advantage of it and return something faulty. They do their due diligence, they take precautions that it doesn't happen, and it still happens. Doesn't mean that everybody is super trustworthy. I've heard of people buying air conditioners for 3 months and then returning it every summer. People take advantage of it, but as a society, we win with that policy. Having trust on both sides actually increases our commerce significantly to a higher scale, and I think that's one of the reasons in third world countries we are still struggling with things like e-commerce. And even for e-commerce in India now, they have started how do I कैसे हैं. So they use a method of OTP, one time password. So before you can hand over something, you have to make sure that the customer has an OTP, and there are still some checks and balances built into it. But with that lack of trust, the retailers have been able to figure out at least some ways to complete the transactions better. But India still has a long way to go. Now let's get out of this whole society and let's talk about work. Trust at work is also very important, and it has a very tangible cost. The difference is, compared to society, a workplace is a very small society. If you were to believe the psychological, sociological research, 150 to 200 people is what they recommend in a department. If your department is larger than that, you have to break it down, because people cannot make those many connections and keep them at workplace. So if you have more than 150 to 200 people will not remember everyone. They'll act, they'll treat others as strangers, things like that. So about 150 to 200 is the optimal size for a department. Within that, if you don't have trust, if you have someone who's a player, who's playing tricks, who's going behind people's backs and doing things, it's very easy to quickly recognize that kind of behavior. And what happens is, if you are good at strategies, if you play games, if you go to a boardroom meeting, you'll probably wipe the floor. You'll annihilate your competition. But the fact is, because it's a small society, you will never get to the boardroom if you're not trustworthy. And that's how most of the street smarts don't get to a good place in an organization, because, like I said, it's very difficult for someone to be street smart, play tricks, and hide it from everyone. Some people are able to do that, and they do rise to the top. But most street smarts who are not smart otherwise do get weeded out. But one example that comes to mind is, before working here, I used to work for a large retailer, and they had adopted a policy where every year they would get rid of their bottom 5%, taking cue from Jack Welch's philosophy in GE. And you would think that will work, right? You get rid of your bottom 5% performers, and you will have a good team. Well, people are smart, and they very quickly figure out that if they have this power to choose who gets fired, they can use it to not only weed out their risks and their competition, but it also enforces undue loyalty from their team. It goes both ways, right? The manager in this case acts in a selfish manner to only remove people who are a threat to their existence, and the reports only act in a way that their manager does not fire them. So it turns into a very difficult work environment. But the other thing that happens is, if people don't trust their co-workers, and especially their manager, most of their energy goes in protecting their own interests than actually accomplishing any real task, completing any real task. So what I'm trying to say is, there is a very tangible, very significant cost of lack of trust. at workplace, and that's what defines a good work culture versus a bad work culture. It is really up to the senior management to figure out that kind of behavior and take care of it while they have time, because once it sets in, the culture flows top down. If you put someone bad at the top, within a few months the entire organization starts behaving that way, because if they can see people getting away with the kind of behavior that the organization is preaching against, they know that the preaching doesn't help. It's meaningless. So it's very important for an organization to place people in their upper leadership who are aware and who are willing to act against bad behavior, especially the behavior that creates lack of trust in people. So we'll probably talk a little more on this. That's for now. Thanks.